Most people building voice agents and using voice agents in their businesses are obsessed with the wrong thing. Let me explain. My name's Slavi. I am the founder and head of product at AgentVoice, which is a platform that helps businesses build and deploy agents in a safe and reliable environment. Okay. And I've seen time and time again where people and businesses are so focused on how natural the voice sounds, how fast the response is, and what model they're using. And to be honest, none of that really matters if you put your agent in the wrong place. Okay, I've spent years building voice agents for real companies like insurance, healthcare, property management, e-commerce, real estate, on and on and on. And the pattern is always the same. When it works incredibly well. But when it doesn't work, it's not a tech problem, it's a use case problem. Okay, so let me walk you through where AI voice and voice agents actually deliver, and more importantly, where you should not waste your time. So let's start with the easy win. This is the easiest setup. This is the best use case you can be in. It's the low-hanging fruit. And that is inbound calls. More so, inbound calls that handle very repetitive questions. Okay, so think about a dental office, right? They get the same calls all day. What time do you close? Do you take my insurance? Can I reschedule? Like it's the same questions over and over. And a voice agent, handles that stuff perfectly. Not because it's smart or super intellectual, but it's because I can't say this clearly enough. It's because the problem is structured. The answers exist. Okay, the questions that they ask, they're predictable. You give a solid knowledge base to an agent and it just works, right? Same thing for property management companies, e-commerce support, insurance brokers, anywhere where you've got a high volume of calls that follow a similar pattern, voice agents will outperform a human on consistency alone, okay? Doesn't have bad days, doesn't put people on hold, and it scales without hiring. So the mistake that most people make is trying to deploy a voice agent where there is no pattern, right? There is no documentation, there's no structured answers, and it's chaotic. Okay, that's where voice agents will fall apart, and they might be able to provide some value, right, in certain areas, but the goal here is to save time, right? And if you have a voice agent that is constantly dealing with edge cases and outliers of questions and that kind of stuff, then that's where things will start falling apart, and that's where you're going to start questioning whether the return's really worth it. So, the real money that's left on the table is after hours, right? So when it comes to inbound calling, most businesses miss somewhere between 20 to 40% of their calls, depending on the industry, right? And they come in after hours, they come in on the weekends, they come in during, lunch, they come in when you're sick, and what happens, right? Goes to voicemail or to some other IVR system, which, in terms of voicemail, no one's leaving those anymore. It's 2026. If a voicemail's left, sad reality of it is most people don't listen to them anyways. So, you're just losing revenue at that point, right? A voice agent picks up, has a real conversation. It can qualify the lead. It can book an appointment. It can send a text confirmation. It's done, right? That person was going to call your competitor if your voice agent hadn't picked up. And these are real things that we've seen. And, now they're on your calendar. So this isn't about, replacing anyone on your team. Nobody at your company was working at 9 p.m. anyways. This is pure capture of business that was already going to walk out of the door. And this is where, I think voice agents get really interesting is let's talk about outbound, right? So specifically qualification. Now, outbound is where people get really excited, but also where they get the concept wrong. Voice agents aren't really closers, right? They're not good at closing. It's not good at negotiating. If you've ever talked to an AI system, like you might be able to argue, sure, it can provide good responses to some objections, but no. In a voice setting, it's not good at those things. It's not good at handling objections in a complex sales conversation. And any salesperson listening to me right now is probably nodding their head and they're agreeing. right? That's still a human job. And I think that might be one of the last things that AI touches. That is a field where you need a human touch. Okay, talking to a computer, doesn't matter how smart it is or how natural it sounds, is still just going to be, it's not going to be right. Okay, but qualifying them, that's a different story. Confirming appointments, verifying contact info, pre-screening applicants, collecting missing docs, following up on a form submission, that kind of stuff is repetitive. It's high volume, right? And doesn't require persuasion. It requires consistency. And I know that every salesperson that's out there in the world right now that thinks they're a great salesperson might not be that consistent. And they're really good at their job, but there's certain things that they have to do in their, day to day that aren't really a salesperson's job. And so, when you use voice agents to take someone from, like a cold lead to qualified and ready for a human, at that point, the ROI is pretty obvious, right? You or your sales team get to stop wasting time on people who, we're never going to convert and start talking to people who actually are ready. And, that's it's underrated. But one of the things that I think most people struggle with is realizing that, these systems are not IVRs. I got to make that super clear. A lot of people, I've seen thousands and thousands of calls, and this is something that we focus on trying to solve every single day. People don't realize that they're actually talking to something intelligent. And that's a problem that we try to solve for every different industry is when you connect to someone, right? How can you get them to understand that this is actually a sophisticated system? It truly can help them out. Because most people, instead of press 1 for sales, press 2 for support, which we know everyone hates, a voice agent can literally just ask what you need and route you to the right person, instead of having to wait through this whole dialogue of different numbers and different directories. But honestly, the real value isn't actually the routing, it's the context. So when the call actually gets handed to a human, like a support staff or sales staff, whatever it might be, they're already going to know who's calling. The agent gives them a summary and tells them why they're calling before they even connect the two and, what they already discussed. And the caller doesn't have to repeat themselves. The agent doesn't have to start from scratch necessarily. And so, the human agent doesn't have to start from scratch. And so that alone cuts call times and makes the experience dramatically better, right? It's a small thing that compounds across every single call, over time. So that's my spiel on voice agents there. But I think the most important thing that we need to talk about is where voice agents don't work. And this is something, nobody really wants to talk about this part, to be honest. But voice agents, they struggle with things like high emotion situations. If someone's really angry or really frustrated or scared, they're not going to want to talk to a computer, right? So these are times where people need a real human. They need empathy that feels genuine or real, not empathy that's generated, by AI. It also struggles with, and I got to be careful how I say this, but it kind of struggles with certain complex problem solving, right? If the conversation requires going back and forth, if it requires digging into edge cases, making judgment calls, that's not really what this technology is built for right now. Like if you had an agent, an AI voice agent that was made for insurance claims, like those are complex things, and those are situations where I wouldn't say, fully trust these systems. And, things that require deep technical troubleshooting, right? If someone's calling because their system's down and they need someone to walk them through a fix in real time, a voice agent just isn't really the answer for those types of things, right? The right model, it's not replacement, it's augmentation. You let the AI handle the volume and the repetition, and you let humans handle the complexity and the relationships. That's where the leverage is, right? So, the company is getting real results from this. They're not asking, how do I replace my team? I never see that. I need to get rid of my team. How do I replace them? A better question that they're asking would be, what's eating up, my team's time? That shouldn't be, right? Like, what's my team doing every day that they should not be doing? That could be easily augmented. And, that's a fundamentally different question. And it also leads to a fundamentally different outcome. So, because when you remove the repetitive load, the scheduling calls, the FAQs, the confirmation calls, the team or your team gets to do the actual work, that moves the business forward, the high value conversations, the relationship building, right? The closing. And Voice AI doesn't make your team smaller. Okay. It makes them more effective. It gives you more velocity, gives you more time to grow, makes them much more effective. And so if you're building voice agents, you already know the hardest part isn't the actual voice, right? It's everything else that surrounds that. The scripts, the routing logic, the campaign setups, the compliance, call summaries, handling knowledge bases, making sure there's no out-of-date information in them. There's a lot of moving pieces, right? There's a lot more around the voice agents than just the voice. But, that's what inspired me to build AgentVoice. It's a place that you can go construct these systems in minutes, really. Maybe an hour, depending on how complex your use case is, and not have to struggle with all of the different things that come with building a voice agent, like testing and compliance and all those fun things. So if that's something that's interesting to you, I have the link to AgentVoice in the description. Feel free to check it out. You get a free start if you're wanting to go ahead and kick off an agent and start doing some testing. And on that note, we also do have a community of founders and developers who are actually building and deploying the stuff. So, sharing what's working, what's not, and how to improve over time, right? Because this space moves quickly, very quickly. And the gap between people who are executing and people who are just, watching is getting much bigger every week, every day. So, voice AI is infrastructure now. Like it's not a novelty, but infrastructure only really works when it's deployed in the right place. And that's where I'm trying to be honest with you after seeing thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of calls. I know exactly where these systems fit best. And I'm not saying that they don't fit in certain areas. I'm just saying that they don't fit best in all these different areas. High repetition, structured outcomes, all those things, structured problems, all those things are where AI voice fits best. Okay. But, focus there first, right? That's the, the results speak for themselves. If you guys like this video, please, it would help us out a ton if you gave it a thumbs up, if you shared it with some of your friends who might also be building voice AI. And, if you gave us a follow or subscribed, it would help tremendously. And like I said, I invite you to our community. I invite you to check out AgentVoice and build an account. It's free to get started. And, I'd love to see you there. I'd love to see what you build. And I hope that this video brought you some value or maybe inspired you to get into getting a voice agent involved in your business or building voice agents for other businesses. And I wish the best of luck. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.